what I wanted to share with everybody today is we actually put a lot of thought into Sammy sessions. If this is your first Sammy session, as Dave said, welcome. So Sales and Marketing Innovators has been around for more than 20 years. And we really look at the intersection of sales and marketing and where the I would say where the cutting edge stuff really occurs. And although we get caught up in a lot of AI stuff, sometimes we miss the human element, which doesn't go away. And our speaker today is going to talk at length about the human element. We were joking before the call, you know, teaching AI systems uh, empathy isn't the same as sentiment analysis, and we got a long way to go. But there's also the human scale, and also we're living in different times here, and so the empathy becomes a big deal because your prospects and even your employees may be feeling some anxiety, not only with work but for other factors as well. And this will factor all in. So when we did the programming, we also felt that we can't get lost. Innovation doesn't mean just innovation in technology. It also means innovation in human behavior. And sometimes innovation in human behavior means we have to do a little introspection on who we are, our teams, our customers, in our entire business ecosystem. So, to that end, today is called The Missing Link in Marketing: How Empathy Influences Buyer Behavior. And as we started scanning the landscape, we were fortunate to have found, in my opinion, probably the best person, Rob Volpe, on the empathy world. And if you haven't, I've got my own little thing here. Rob's book on Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis, is actually a really good read. And Rob's going to talk about some of the highlights from the book today. And by all means, I recommend you buy it. But Rob is the founder of Ignite 360, award-winning book that I just showed you. Tell me more about that. And he's leading a marketing insights firm. And insights from, and when Rob and I first discussed the call, the insights from an empathy viewpoint is so different from all the insights that I spent time with, working in, various industries. So he's worked with many of the world's leading brand, Kraft, Heinz, Microsoft, Nestle, Amazon, Whole Foods, and Rob has a plethora of very, very happy clients where he's done amazing things for. Rob is based out of San Francisco. And we were again joking before the call. He's actually traveling. He's on the East Coast. So when I saw Rob's kitchen, it's like, Rob, I know you. Now that I know you, you must have a better kitchen than that in San Francisco. He says, yeah, I'm at a suite and in Massachusetts. So Rob, without further roasting and without further ado, I want to say, welcome to Massachusetts, and I turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Dave, John, Molly as well. Thank you for that warm welcome. Really excited to be here. Let me get my screen share going. And yes, I am in North Chelmsford. And even though my in-laws are here, I'm still picking up recommendations on great pizza places. Thank you, Dave, for that with Joni's. We're going to be going soon. Um, so yeah, home for me is San Francisco, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But welcome to the missing link in marketing, how empathy influences buyer behavior. And it's not just empathy that I'm going to be talking about it, but it's about what you do with empathy and how you start to act on it. As I get going, I want you to just keep this image in mind. $300 million. What would $300 million in additional revenue mean to your business? That is something that we're going to explore because that is the outcome of that missing link. So, as Rob mentioned, I'm Rob Volpe. I'm the founder of Ignite 360, a startup that I created in early 2011. So you're seeing my smiling face. You're seeing Ignite 360, which is the marketing research firm I founded. I just exited last summer, I sold the company to Dig Insights. I'm now part of the Dig Insights team. But a little bit more background on myself and then what I do and the type of work. I've been accused of being an astute observer of life as well as a master storyteller. I will go where you need to go to ask the questions. While I'm here in the Boston metro area, San Francisco is home for me, where I live with my husband and our three cats, Domino, Barnabas, and Solitaire there in the back. I'm also the author, as Rob mentioned, of Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time. And that book brings to life the 5 steps to empathy, which is some of what we'll be talking about today. But I use narrative storytelling to bring those things to life. So it won an award from the Independent Book Publishers Association as one of the best self-help books of 2022 when it came out, because I use stories of real people and real experiences to bring to life what it means to get to a place of empathy and how to overcome the barriers to get there. The type of work that I do and Ignite 360 and Dig does. So again, it's marketing research. It's looking at innovation, at human journeys, at branding and communication, always with a focus on building empathy, providing strategic thinking, dynamic storytelling, and that leads to liftoff, that one big idea to move your world. Rob mentioned some of the companies that we've been fortunate enough to work with. Here's a lovely slide with a few more of them. But really honored that over 13 years we were able to build up such an impressive client roster and reputation that another firm wanted to acquire us. So today's conversation, I'm going to talk about this missing link and what it actually means for your business. And we're going to get into the 5 steps to empathy, and we'll have time for Q&A. I do have some activities and things for us to put into the chat, so keep your fingers loose and nimble. And then if questions do come up, also put them into the chat. Rob is monitoring and he can jump in. I'm pretty flexible as we go through everything. So what today really is a story. And it's a story about how a misunderstood soft skill is actually the superpower that you need to drive big results with your customers. I want you to think, and actually put this into the chat. I want you to think about a business that gets you. What's a business that you return to time and again that you want to be affiliated with? And how much money do you spend on that business every year? Just put in what comes to mind, no wrong answers. LL Bean. Who else? TJ Maxx. Awesome. Give me a couple more. Businesses that really get you, that they understand you, you are affiliated with them. Disney. For myself, Peloton is a brand. REI, awesome one. Peloton's a brand that I put in there. It's something that I have a relationship with. I want to be affiliated with them. I feel like they get me. I spend $50 a year or a month on the subscription, and I've bought 2 of their devices. You can think about how much money you've spent, whether it's REI or Patagonia or even Kenny's Burgers, which I'll have to check out next time I'm in Dallas. Think about those businesses and how much money you're actually spending with them. Now, I want you to think about a business that doesn't get you. Somebody that maybe you've walked away from the relationship. Think about a business perhaps you've never gone to because you seem different. There's just something that is too opposite to who you are. How much money are you spending with them? You don't need to put that one necessarily in the chat, but I want you to think about those companies. Now, what do you think those 2 businesses have in common? What it is about the relationship and having built a healthy relationship with their customers. To do that, though, for those companies, whether it's REI, Kenny's Burgers, Patagonia, Peloton, in my case, they have to identify with their customers in order to build and create a healthy relationship.
Yeah, hey Rob, Bob
Yeah,
Britton had an interesting comment, and
yes.
he said it's funny how things you dislike come to us easier than those who get us. Would love your perspective on that.
Um, well, it's easier to, it's often easier to reflect on the things that you're against or maybe um, uh, get your ire up, so to speak, than to really think about, who's the brand that I really am in love with? Because we don't often think about that brand as much, even though we've got that strong relationship and we're going to them all the time. It's like, oh, I'm a big Starbucks drinker. I don't necessarily think of Starbucks first, but I know I will not go over here. I won't spend my money there. So I think that's part of where that comes from.
Thank you.
Don't you also assume, though, that you should be treated well and have, and that get good customer service, which means you expect it. So when you don't get it, it's more memorable because you're more upset. It gives more emotion, right?
Yes. Yeah, and what's interesting is, so I'll use Starbucks as an example then, which is actually this case study as well. If I go into Starbucks and I have a bad experience once, let's say Starbucks is a brand that I feel like gets me, I've got that relationship. If I have one bad experience, is that going to sour my relationship with them? Or am I going to be willing to give them another chance because of the goodwill that's been built up? Um, versus if I go to Kenny's Burgers because I've never been there before, I only know that, hey, the Sammy group recommended it. So I go in and you know what? I don't have a great experience or the burger's not all that. I'm sure that's not the case, but imagine that that's my experience. Then yeah, I'm not going to be willing to go back. It won't have built a relationship with me. And that's ultimately what we're talking about is the relationship and what goes into that relationship. And even though we're talking about you as a consumer, all of this has application to your life in sales, in marketing, the people that you work with in business, and even in your personal life as a neighbor, a community member, a friend, or a family. So back to Starbucks and the case study. These are great questions too. Thank you. But back to Starbucks and the case study. So it was 2013. Starbucks came to us. They had had a really terrible Black Friday. And so for those of you that don't know, Black Friday is the day after Thanksgiving. It's typically the day that retailers would move into the black for the year. And Starbucks would do a good business in gifts for other people, but they were having a really terrible year. And this photo that's up is a picture of their gift collection. And they asked us to help them figure out what they should be doing differently in future years. So we spread out, went into different stores, we observed, and then talked to their actual customers to find out what was happening. And we learned a few different things. One of which was that, hey, how in the world, I sometimes for this exercise have a coffee mug in front of me and I don't, but how in the world do I wrap that mug? If I'm going to give that to my students, my kid's teacher, or to the postman or a service provider in my life, what do I actually do with that? So we brought that back to Starbucks. It helped them understand, oh, wait a minute, our guests buy gifts at Starbucks for people in their life and they want them pretty much ready to go. So Starbucks took that insight, so they had some empathy with their consumer and put the mugs, they created the dot collection, which ran for 3 years, and they put all of the products inside boxes. And there was a lid nested at the back of the box. So all you had to do was pick up the box, pay for it, and then you could easily put the lid on it, and it was a nice presentable box for a gift. You could put it into a gift bag, throw a bow on it, whatever you needed to do. That helped them drive sales. We also recognized the challenge people had when they were at the register and they were trying to buy a gift card. And Starbucks would come out with this sort of collection of different gift card designs at the holidays. But many of you, if you think about your own experiences, when you're checking out at the register, I know for myself, I'm always feeling pressure if I've got people behind me in line because they want to get their order in or pick up their order or do whatever they need to do and while they're there. And so I can't leisurely browse and think about, I want to buy a gift card for my nephew James. He's into aviation. Do they have one that has airplanes on it? Like you don't have time to do that searching and scanning because the person behind you and the person behind them are wanting to get their latte and get going. So we recommended, based off of that, that Starbucks create a gift wall and a separate display section in their store so that they could sell gift cards. That led to $150 million in incremental gift card sales the following year. And Starbucks actually called it out in their fiscal or their financial results, which is how I'm able to know how much money they actually earned off of that. So $150 million in incremental sales just by one change that they were able to implement because they had a better understanding of who their customer was and what their needs were and what the emotional situation was. They were able to create an offering that yielded additional sales. And so that 150 million is already halfway to that $300 million mark that I was talking about. Now, this is another great example when you think about beauty. And I want somebody to just jump in and tell me, like, what brand comes to mind when you think about beauty? And beauty in the sense of really getting your customer and who your consumer is. How about now? Okay, some people are jumping into the chat, and somebody said Dove. Yes, Dove for sure. So Dove, almost 20 years ago now, set out to better understand women and their relationship to beauty and how they actually see beauty themselves. So they went out, did some research, built that empathy. It helped them sharply differentiate themselves by understanding who their consumer was, where they were coming from, and relating to that. They were able to better differentiate. They were able to empower by identifying with women. So they changed the relationship. The relationship between beauty brands and women is often antagonistic, and it's, hey, aspirational, you need to look like this. So it's antagonistic in the sense that it's making women not feel good about themselves. Therefore, I need to use this product so that I will be more attractive in a very commercial, standardized sense of the definition. And Dove said, no, that's not how this works. Women actually are beautiful on their own, and we need to help women celebrate that. And that is what empowered women by identifying with them. And it grew their business. $1.5 billion in growth over 10 years because of the Real Beauty campaign. And the Real Beauty campaign 20 years later is still going on.
Yeah, Rob, can I just add on to that?
Yeah.
I was working in the YouTube business at the time, and it goes back to your comment about storytelling. And feel free to comment on this, is Dove, in order to tell their story, they actually turned to video as a more effective mechanism to get that message through. Thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. And when you can hear, I know they did some really powerful campaigns where women were talking about what it felt like to either see themselves as beautiful or not beautiful and the tension that existed. And from an empathetic perspective, hearing the story of one person is going to be a lot more powerful than hearing, oh, 80% of women want to see themselves reflected in advertising. Okay, that's true and important, but that's not exactly what is going to focus and drive, motivate somebody to do something. You need to have that number in your head as well as have the what I call the heart story, the power of one, bringing to life that bigger number. So the video was really effective to do that because people were able to identify with the individuals and hear their voices. It's much more impactful. So empathy is really the key to all of this. It is that missing link. And when you're empathizing with your customers and users, it's going to create an advantage in your relationship. So if you're in sales, you're selling a product, let's say you're even in B2B sales, if you understand who your customer's end consumer end user is, it's going to help you actually sell more because you're going to be talking your client's language from the things that they're interested in at the very end. And the photos here are from some end user interactive workshops that we had where we paired up our clients with actual end users of products. So in this case, I think this was General Mills's convenience and food service team. So they were selling to uh, um, operators of like assisted living facilities, aging institutions, and educational facilities. And that's great, but you're talking to the corporate buyer, but they wanted to understand how the end user is actually using the product so that they could take that back and offer better things and show their customer that they understand their business and we understand what your end users are. So it strengthens the overall relationship. So this seems pretty simple, but why doesn't everybody do it? Because this stuff is not easy. A lot of times in today's day and age, with all the data and even the AI, we're used to putting our customers under the microscope and studying their behavior and seeking to understand. And this is a paradigm that we need to shift. Instead of looking through the algorithms where we're looking for the answers in patterns, we're hoping for insights to emerge. What we're missing is that actual identification with the customer as well as with their needs, because that's what's going to strengthen the relationship. So imagine if you're able to shift that paradigm around. Instead of looking at your customers as data points, think about them as people that have actual needs, that organizations that have needs, and how do you use that understanding and that empathy to strengthen the relationship? That lack of empathy in the relationship with whether it's the consumers or the customers, it's actually costing brands at least $300 million per year. That's where that number that I first showed you comes from. And it's actually from a study that was fielded in 2018. And they looked at the use of empathy in customer experience and how much money businesses, market by market, country by country, would gain if they were putting more empathy into their customer experience. And in the United States alone, it was somewhere between, it was a range of 270 million to 500 million. So I just said, let's go on the low end, let's say $300 million. So if you're working with a large company, $300 million is being left on the table, just not even being realized because you're not using empathy in the relationship with your customers and with your consumers. So that means there's a lot of opportunity that's available. And when you think about that business that doesn't get you, that one that you walked away from, you're part of that $300 million in unrealized revenue. Businesses that use empathy to identify with the customer, they're going to create better products and services. Think about what Starbucks was able to do. Think about what Dove was able to do as just two examples. They're able to build on the success and be embraced by their consumer. In fact, 9 out of 10 consumers want brands to show empathy through their behavior. So as we were talking about with the different businesses that you're connected with or you feel that connection with, you're wanting a brand to show empathy through their behavior. And that's part of what's happening right now as brands are walking back their DEI commitments or evolving them. And the ways that they're communicating that isn't showing that they understand the full breadth of their consumers. And that's leading to a lot of people feeling disconnected or not supported from some of those businesses. And there's now, I think, boycotts that are being planned to help get that point across.
Hey, Rob, you just muted.
How did I manage to do that? So when brands are, I'll back up slightly. When brands aren't identifying with the customer, that relationship goes bad really quickly. I'm sure many of you have heard about the controversy that Bud Light stepped into a couple years ago. In spring of 2023, they had done a promotion with Dylan Mulvaney, who is a trans woman actress influencer. And they gave her some Bud Light as she was celebrating a milestone in her life. And the conservative right, cultural conservative right, did not appreciate that and started a boycott and took some action against Bud Light and got very vocal about it on social media. Anheuser-Busch lost about $1 billion in sales. Bud Light used to be the #1 beer brand in the United States. It is no longer that. It was overtaken because of this particular instance. And what actually happened here wasn't that Bud Light wasn't identifying with cultural conservatives or weren't identifying with the trans community. They had lost sight of what it meant to be male, to be masculine in today's day and age. And were not adjusting their messaging to keep up. They weren't putting empathy into their relationship with their broad customer base in order to keep different portions of their consumer base happy. And this is a big challenge. The larger you get as a brand, as a business, the more constituents you have, and you've got to be thinking about how, if I do this, how is this going to react over here? Bud Light has historically been a big, and Anheuser-Busch has historically been a big supporter of the gay lesbian community. As a gay man myself, I can tell you 30 years ago, being in gay pride events in Los Angeles, and Bud Light was always present. They were always sponsoring activities and events. So it wasn't unusual for Bud Light to be doing something with Dylan Mulvaney. What was unusual was that in today's day and age, something that they're doing on social media can be found by other people and get magnified by other people. So it's not just, oh, this is contained to Los Angeles Pride. This is actually now something that the world can see, and you have to keep those things in mind. Similarly, Target ran into issues with their Pride Month display in that very same year, just a few weeks after the Bud Light situation. They lost 5% of their sales that June because of the backlash to the Pride displays that they had. Target has recently been criticized because now they've backed away from their DEI commitments as well, but not providing enough explanation to help people understand what to actually do or what to expect from Target moving forward. What that does is it undermines the foundations of the relationship. And so you don't feel safe or secure in your relationship. And that leads you to want to break up with Target or not drink Bud Light or any other brand that you're having an issue with.
So, Rob, this raises an issue of damned if you do, damned if you don't. It does that, and where does empathy fit in here? Because if we're gonna apply that, we've got a little bit of a challenge, don't you think?
Absolutely. So, it gets very difficult with the big brands, big businesses where you have such a wide constituent base. In my mind, it goes back to what the values are of your organization and staying true to that, but also the communication. Both of those things were communication issues that those companies ran into. And even now with the DEI rollbacks that are happening or changes, it's about how things are getting communicated. Rob, before the call, we were talking about some of the firings and layoffs that are happening in the federal government. And the way that they're being communicated isn't being done in a supportive manner or where people feel seen or heard or valued. And so as a result, that relationship suffers and it struggles. So if I'm counseling a big business, it's not that, oh, you need to be pablum and, just be so generic that you're not going to offend anybody, because then you don't stand for anything. And again, back to the businesses that get you. Well, if you're not getting anybody, who are you actually getting? So you need to find ways to connect with the different consumers to support them, but also put a message out that you welcome all consumers, all customers are welcome here. We support abroad and we recognize the diversity, the D word, in the United States, and everybody's right to exist and to be and to bring that forward. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. When you think about customers, 86% say empathy is the biggest driver of loyalty. Again, think about those brands. If you get me, I'm going to get you. I'm going to keep coming back. We keep seeing it time and again in different data. And when you misstep, you can go too far, actually, and over-identifying. Pepsi had a situation that came up in, I think it was 2018, where they did a video featuring a protest that the police came in to break up, and Kendall Jenner magically appeared with a Pepsi, and she broke through the line of protesters and walked over to the police officer, as you can see in that still, handed him a Pepsi, and we had world peace. And that was quite controversial at the time. It came back up in 2020 during the the protests over George Floyd's murder. And it was ringing as tone deaf. They were over empathizing with the community and ended up offending kind of everybody in that situation. Another example, so Dove, I held them up as an example of a brand that really gets it, that does a great job with the campaign for real beauty. So just before the pandemic, they continued the campaign for real beauty and thought, you know what? Let's be more open towards women's body shapes. Let's create products, packaging for our products that reflect the 7 average typical women's body shapes. And so you see that picture there that came out, huge, huge backlash. Dove actually pulled the product off the shelf. They didn't even wait to let it sell through. They removed it and put the traditional packaging back on. Because while women want to, what they didn't understand was that while women want to be celebrated for their beauty and their natural shape, they didn't need that staring back at them in the packaging of their body wash or shampoo. So you can go a little too far, and that's what makes this tricky. It's also why research is important and really knowing your consumer, building up that empathy so it starts to become part of your intuition.
Hey, Rob, we got a question in
Yeah.
from Bob. He said, you can't please all the people all the time. You need to do a careful risk reward calculus if you decide to show preference to one demographic or another. So the question is empathy a business decision or a moral/ethical one?
So I'm going to get into empathy in a few more slides specifically, but empathy is something we're all born with as individuals, as humans, and we all have the ability to do it. When you get into a business situation, you're not going to do well if you're not having empathy with your consumers. The trick is to have empathy, and empathy just means that you understand where somebody's coming from. It doesn't mean that you agree with them. It doesn't mean that you're, kowtowing to them even. It just means you understand where they're coming from. And so you can make decisions. Every business needs to choose. And again, that's where I mentioned it goes back to like, well, what's the mission of my organization? What are my values? And how does that show up in my business? And am I then okay? Now, I was the sole owner of my company, so that's very easy for me to stand on my morals and say, well, this is what my values are, and we're going to do this, and we're not going to work with these types of clients in these specific categories, and be okay with that. If I'm publicly traded, it's a whole other challenge. Anheuser-Busch, Target, Disney, all have run into that. So it's a business imperative to use empathy to build relationships with your consumers. It is a business decision on who you are actually going to build relationships with, and if you're going to do that at the expense of having a relationship with other consumers. Because what happens when you do that, so this was actually all teed up quite nicely. When you do that, the competition is waiting and standing by to identify with that customer that maybe you've decided, no, I'm not going to go down that path. So one example, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Black Rifle Coffee Company. Founded in Salt Lake City by a group of military veterans. They have a pro-veteran position. And so for myself, I'm like, that's awesome. I support our vets. I'm grateful for everything that they've done. They are also, though, pro-Second Amendment. That is not something I'm as comfortable with personally. And then they also talk about a pro-America brand. And that's a little nebulous. So like, okay, what is that about? And then based on where they advertise and some of their messaging, you can see where that goes towards more of the cultural conservative right. Those are all things. I wouldn't say Starbucks is not pro-America or not pro-veteran, but they are not pro-Second Amendment, as I understand it. And you can see it creates an opportunity. There is a group of consumers that don't love Starbucks for some of their positions, and somebody else has said, hey, there's a business opportunity here. Black Rifle is not the largest coffee chain, not the biggest competitor, but they have a series of chains around the country. Their product is available in Walmart around the country and in convenience stores around the country. I think there's a ready-to-drink coffee that they've created. So they actually have found a niche audience and they are pulling business away. So that's the other thing to be thinking about. If you're a smaller business, what is an area or a space, again, would align to me and what's important to me, but maybe that somebody's ignoring that I could actually lean into and build a business from. So, what can we do about all of this? I love this quote from Maya Angelou. I think we all have empathy. We may not have enough courage to display it. That is very true. We are all born with the ability to have empathy, but it is about actually displaying it.
So, Rob, there's a little side chat on uh, the comment about born with empathy. Are we born with it and lose it? And or we just are there people that aren't there? Somebody made a comment. I have met plenty of wholly selfish and self-serving empathy-free people in many countries. So is that a result of is empathy like curiosity? We're born with tons of it, and over time, our environment, the education system, perhaps beat it out of us.
Great question. So empathy is something we're all born with. The neuroscientists have found what parts of our brain light up when we are experiencing the different types of empathy. And while I'm answering this question, I would love for people to just throw in the chat really quickly a definition of empathy, how they think about it. So we're born with it. It's something that we all have the ability to use. However, the analogy I always use is that it's like a muscle. It's something that we have to train. So when you think about a baby is born with legs and muscles in its legs, but it isn't able to walk or run right away. It needs to take time to strengthen up those muscles, and then it's crawling and then standing and scooting and then walking and running over time. And just if you know anybody that has had an injury, your muscles atrophy as well. Empathy is very much like that. You need to keep using those muscles to keep them strong and active. And so I'm not going to look at the chat, but I'm going to pretend that I'm psychic and say that I think there's probably 3 different definitions that we could categorize all of people's definitions of empathy. And they're going to fall into this area consolidated. Empathy is connecting with another's perspective or their emotions as if you were them. So there's 2 different things here, connecting with another's perspective, and then also connecting with another's emotions as if you were them. And then the colloquial to walk in someone else's shoes as them. So typically that's what happens. We get 3 different definitions. One is a cognitive definitions, understanding somebody's perspective or point of view. Another is understanding somebody else's emotions. And then the broader walk in someone else's shoes as them. All of those things are correct. I run workshops and trainings around empathy, and somebody gave me this definition once, and I love it, so I always share it. Empathy is a tiny version of the other person inside my brain that I can ask, how does this person feel about this topic? That's another way to bring the idea of empathy to life. It is something that you're holding in your brain and understanding what is their point of view? How are they feeling about something? And then what can I actually do? What is my response to that? Because there are 2 types of empathy. I've kind of given this away already, but there's cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is that feeling the feelings of somebody else as they are feeling them. Cognitive empathy is perspective taking. I can see your point of view. And 2 different parts of your brain light up whether you're having emotional empathy or cognitive empathy. In the workplace, cognitive empathy is the thing that is easier for people to access. It's easier to harness and utilize. Emotional empathy can take people, not everybody can access it. And you have to really work to regulate it because it can take you to a place of compassion very quickly. And when you look at the radical empathy or against empathy, the arguments are around somebody that wears their heart on their sleeve. They're being led by heart-based decisions rather than a cognitive decision. And you need to always balance those 2 things. It's that head and the heart. that I mentioned earlier. But in the workplace, generally, it's about cognitive empathy. It's about understanding the point of view of a colleague, of a client, or a customer. I also want to just clarify quickly that empathy is not sympathy. They're two different things. Sympathy is the ability to feel for a person, while empathy is the ability to feel with a person. It's the difference between a three-letter word for and the four-letter word with. Sympathy creates a power dynamic where empathy is seeing somebody on an equal playing field, seeing them as equal to you. So sympathy has its place, but empathy is what we want to be dealing with. And in the workplace, studies have found that 82% of CEOs believe that empathy contributes to a company's financial performance. So again, this seems so simple and obvious. Why isn't everybody doing this? Well, because it's complicated and it's not easy. Being empathetic is challenging for us. You're hearing this already. You're seeing it from the examples and even in the chat, the comments you guys have been making, which are all great. And I hear this from people where it's like, well, I really struggle to be empathetic. This person is so different from me, or I just don't understand where they're coming from. 42% of employees share that struggle. So nearly half of people in the workplace are struggling to be empathetic. The muscle is not as strong. They're not as in shape as they could be. And the tension really starts at the top. 55% of CEOs recognize it's their job to build a culture of empathy in the workplace, how they lead, how they relate to people. The more empathy they can put into it, the better they're going to be, the better the workplace is going to be. Yet, a larger number than that, 63% say they struggle to be empathetic. And remember, the employee number was 42%. So even more CEOs struggle to be empathetic than their employees. And over 2/3 of CEOs worry that they're going to be a pushover or seen as a pushover or lose respect if they show empathy. And that's because they're not understanding how to show up empathetically in the workplace. And CEOs, I just want to say, they didn't come out of the womb. They may think they came out of the womb as a CEO, but they actually didn't. They worked their way up to the top. So these are this is the outcome of behaviors and old tapes, as you might say, that are playing and work our way up as we go through our careers. Because what empathy really is it empowers the skills we need to be the people that we are and hope to become. So empathy, if you start with empathy, it's going to make you better communicating, collaborating, problem solving, persuading. That makes you a better leader, manager, team member, salesperson, marketer, individual contributor, and in your personal life, a better friend, partner, parent, neighbor, and family member. Empathy fuels all of those things to make us better at who we are and who we want to be.
Hey, Rob, can you go to the back a slide?
I'll try. To this slide or the slide?
Yeah. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but having run sales organizations, having run marketing organizations, uh, I need I need that cognitive empathy skill.
Yep.
And you argued that it's difficult to have that skill. I'm going to argue it's even more difficult to recognize that skill in a potential employee. I could be dead wrong. And in effective companies where we made great hires, we kind of had our corporate values. But what you're spelling out here, especially in the second paragraph, are potentially attributes we should look for. So me as running sales, or me as running marketing, or running a company, if I'm going to be hiring, you know, how do I think about empathy?
Great question. So you want to think about this. What I would do in that hiring process is I would ask for people to give you examples, and I would not use the word empathy. Once people hear the word empathy, they take it to a lot of different places. But ask them, hey, walk me through how you persuaded somebody to do something. A great example, my dad used to be in sales. And when I was, I think, 18 or 19 years old, I went to him. I was like, I don't understand, kind of how that works. And he handed me a pen and he's like, sell me this pen. And I'm sure those of you that are in sales, you've gone through this exercise before. And I just kind of laughed that nervous late teenage laugh because I wasn't really sure what to do. And he then reversed and he said, well, tell me, how do you use pens? And he started asking me questions and then playing it back and then used that to help me understand why the pen that he was selling was better than all the other pens. He used empathy to understand what my needs were and then show that he got that so that we were building a rapport as he was asking me questions and making comments about the ways that I was using pens and classes and whatever the situation was. But that ultimately he understood what my needs were and he was able to share that back. So I would be asking people to walk you through situations and listen for if they're using empathy.
Thank you. Great advice.
Yeah. Okay. So there are 5 steps. So to get to empathy in your everyday, there's a lot of things that get in our way. And the 5 steps were identified. I'm going to run through them and talk a little about each one in the time that we have left. The 5 steps were designed to help you overcome those barriers. The first one is to dismantle your judgment. This is the thing that gets in everybody's way. Then you've got to be asking good questions as well as actively listening and being present. And then you need to integrate into understanding and use your solution imagination. And solution imagination is putting it into play so that you are able to say the next statement, ask the next question, and lead towards that positive outcome. So you know that colloquial example, take off your or walk a mile in somebody else's shoes? Well, you got to take your own shoes off before you can put on somebody else's. Judgment's the thing that gets in our way. It's our biases, our stereotypes, our past experiences. We carry them with us and we don't even realize sometimes that we have them. So this is about developing self-awareness in order to overcome and dismantle your judgment. So when you're spending time with your customers, you want to leave your judgment at the door, whether it's on a sales call or you're working on a marketing campaign, be aware of the bias that's coming up for you. Next, ask good questions. So often we're asking leading or closed questions. For leading, think about that courtroom drama where the opposing counsel says, objection, leading the witness. You're in that situation, the other lawyer is trying to get a worldview affirmed by somebody. So it's a leading question, or a closed question is a yes, a no, a maybe, a one-word answer. Instead, we want to be asking broad exploratory questions. And this is a challenge I'm going to leave for you guys to work on is to ask why without using the word why. Use who, what, where, when, and how instead. Rephrase the sentence because why puts us on the defensive. It's something that from the time we were little, when we might have done something wrong, we were asked, why did you draw on the wall a marker? Why did you cut your sister's hair? All of those things teach us then to be defensive and that we got to come up with a really good explanation. If you can rephrase the question, though, and not use the word why, you're going to get a much better answer. And building empathy can be really quick, cost-effective, impactful. If you have in your group a research team or an insights team, reach out to them. Find some ways that you can actually have some of these interactions. Speed dating sessions or other curated empathy building sessions are really useful to do that. And then actively listen. Stay focused, minimize your distractions, choose to listen and concentrate. And if you listen long enough and well enough, you're going to truly understand others. And the example of that is, I'm not going to shame anybody, but just personally reflect, did you stay focused on this presentation, or how many of you actually went and checked social media, your email, answered a Teams chat, or something else that was coming in? And were you really focused and listening to what was being said at the time?
This is an important point, Rob. Recently, Jamie Dimon has come under some controversy for his Back to the Office pledge. And part of it, and he took a swipe at Zoom, of course, we're all on a Zoom call, is that, we can't get things done because we can't stay focused. And that when we bring people together, that suddenly the ability to actively listen, and I'm paraphrasing here, the ability to actively listen would be better. Thoughts?
Uh, well, with all due respect to Jamie Dimon and all he's achieved in his career, I call bullshit on that because there are more distractions probably in the office than there are when you're working remotely. I believe that you need a hybrid combination of those things. We're not robots sitting at a desk. Of course, we're going to get distracted. We've got pets. If I was at home right now, one of the cats would be with us right now, participating in this conversation. They always show up. That's a distraction. I do what I can to minimize it, but I also minimize my screens. Who's to say? I mean, there used to be the jokes about people playing Candy Crush in the office or solitaire on their computers. Those distractions are all still there. And then there's just people to chat with, and oh, let's go have a 1 hour lunch that turns into a 90-minute lunch and gossip about the world. Like, I don't think that the office is a focus in only environment. What we need is for our leaders to have understanding with us, i.e., empathy, and create a relationship where they trust us to get the job done. And let us, if that means I'm going to go take a half hour, an hour, and run to the store, do an errand in the middle of the day because it has to be done during the day, trust that I'm going to get my work done, even if it means I have to work later. Like, I don't need to be at my desk 9 to 5 and doing nothing but, and our brains can't actually focus that much for that long. All of this starts with you. It's your understanding. It's how you integrate into understanding. It's making space for perspectives that don't align to your own. That doesn't mean that you give up your own beliefs, but it means you make room in your head. Um, because there's always different perspectives and points of view, and that's what we need to be open to. And that's, at any time, and I'll talk about current events right now. Yes, the left is very upset about what's happening, but the left was actually, some parts of the left were canceling the right and not listening to them and not making room in their head, not paying attention to the fact that people were struggling to pay their bills because grocery prices were so high or inflation was happening. We have to make room in our heads that, hey, there's something else going on and we need to be curious about it. We need to ask questions and listen to what people are saying. And when we're hearing things, you need to actually try to immerse in people's lives and then use this solution imagination. So that's when you step into the other person's shoes as them. That's a be the consumer, be the client exercise. Try to understand where they're coming from, what it would be able to say, I can imagine how you feel. And again, this is a cognitive ability rather than an emotional one. And if you have trouble getting to step 5, there's something going on in one of the other steps. And I'm willing to bet it's dismantling judgment. You've got blinders on, a brick wall, noise canceling headphones, things that take you away from being able to see other people. So to sum it up, this is an intellectual cognitive exercise. Customers want to engage with brands that identify with their needs. And there's $300 million that's being left on the table if you're not doing that. Keep in mind that there's the 5 steps to empathy, and this takes continual practice to keep the empathy skills strong. Empathy is that superpower that enables you to build relationships that are going to drive those big results with your customers that you're looking for. Thanks. We've got a minute or two for questions. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. This QR code takes you to my website. I have a newsletter that comes out every couple of weeks. The most recent one dropped yesterday. The book is available wherever you buy books, Amazon. I narrated the audiobook, etc.
Thank you, Rob. That was fantastic, and a couple more questions coming in. For those of you who haven't subscribed, they can go to your website. Will that link bring to a book sale or to the subscription link for the newsletter? The newsletter is terrific.
You can, thank you, and you can find both there. But you
Okay.
can just go to Amazon if that's your place to buy books and type in the title. But there are links. If you go into my website, you'll see a tab that says books. And that's where that is. The newsletter, just scroll down to the bottom.
Yeah, and a closing thought, and kudos to Sandy on this. She said we become anti-fragile with many perspectives. We gain perspectives through empathy. Through empathy, that's a great point, Sandy. And so, Rob, I think we have to continually work at this whole empathy challenge. Any other closing thoughts from you as to for everybody on this call? Once we get off this call, what's the one thing we can do when we get off this call to get a little bit better?
spend some time being aware of when judgment is coming up. Keep a judgment journal. So reflect at the end of the day on times that you might have been judgmental about something. The way somebody appeared, looked, maybe you didn't like the sound of my voice or this lovely kitchen behind me. And how did that influence the way that you heard what I was saying or what you might have said back to me? And what could you have done differently?
So interesting on that. Is it, and I'll ask this last question because it feeds off of that. Can we actually, even with a journal, make that call ourselves? Or do we need a spouse or a colleague or somebody to actually tell us if we're being judgmental?
If you have somebody that you feel really safe with to call you on it, you can definitely ask them or say, "Hey, did you notice?" But a lot of times, because it's our bias, our stereotypes, our past experiences, we need to develop the ability to be self-aware, the metacognition of how we're showing up and what might be getting in our way.
Excellent. Rob, this has been fantastic. Before we close, I want to thank the audience. This will be available for recording. For those of you still here, our next section is session is going to be on March 20th at 8 a.m. We'll be back to our regular time. We didn't want to, if Rob was still in San Francisco, we didn't want to wake him up at 5 a.m. We're trying to be somewhat, I would say,
I,
sympathetic at that point. And
no, but that's empathy.
okay,
That is,
good. Thank you for correcting me. So we'll have Joe McCluskey, Senior VP and Strategy Growth Officer in Data Analytics at EXL. The presentation will be customer acquisition, practical ways to use data, Gen AI analytics, and addressable media to drive growth. And when we talk about AI, to close on this, you know, AI lacks the empathy button. So I think what Rob's told us today is really key. So we may go down the path to solve all these issues, but at the end of the day, all of our issues ultimately are human. So Rob, thank you very much. Thank everybody for joining us. Okay, take care.
Awesome stuff. Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob.
thank you guys.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.